Oxytocin, the bringer of creation and destruction. Hello there, I am Dr. K. Paul Stoller, and this short video is based on an article I wrote for a peer-reviewed journal, Oxytocin, the bringer of creation and destruction. This is part 1. Psychoendocrinology is a field of study, but almost nothing from this field is applied in a practical way that can actually help people. I hope to make a small dent herewith in my discussion of the hormone oxytocin, not to be confused with Oxycontin. I believe oxytocin is perhaps the most powerful neuropsychiatric intervention on the planet. Very few know about it outside its application in maternal medicine, or how significant an influence it is in all our lives. There is a dark side to this hormone, which is also a neurotransmitter, and it has to do with all the relationships it has destroyed, or should I say, the lack of this hormone has destroyed untold relationships and marriages. Oxytocin deficiencies are at the root cause of so much distress, misunderstandings, and destruction of our relationships that it has led many to self-medicate, especially alcohol, because alcohol does cause an oxytocin release. Given this hormone is not well appreciated or understood, permit me to review some salient points. There are extraordinarily beneficial uses of the hormonal neurotransmitter called oxytocin. Oxytocin is also accurately described as a neuropeptide, and it's produced in both women and men. Although it's often associated with female reproduction, more recently oxytocin has become known as the love hormone, as it brings forth feelings of trust, security, connection, calmness, and contentment. I first came to learn about oxytocin in my work with brain-injured patients, where it was used to mitigate the anxiety issues they often contend with. My primary focus was using oxytocin with children living with cerebral palsy, as well as environmental encephalitic syndrome, which is erroneously called autism and most often triggered by vaccinations. Over time, I came to discover the profound potential for healing that oxytocin offers related to many of the great ailments of our time, including mental illness, addictions, sexual dysfunction, cancer, and grief. My knowledge of using oxytocin in the treatment of grief is firsthand. In 2007, my beloved 16-year-old son Galen was killed in a train accident, sending me into a chasm of what I came to view as pathological or persistent grief, where I was unable to modulate obsessive thoughts about how my son died, what he might have experienced, what if I had been able to be there, and so on. This collection of fear, anxiety, and panic took on a life of its own, as if it were a separate thought stream that I had no control of. It was suffocating and debilitating. Although I had become adept at using oxytocin for treating fear and anxiety in children on the autism spectrum, it took me over 3 weeks after my son passed until I had the idea that it might help me too. I was so far down the rabbit hole of grief that I could feel a circadian miasm of sorts. Let me explain. There are periods each day, the hour before sunup and the hour after sundown, that the ancients acknowledged as being especially potent times. They referred to the hour before sunrise as the hour of the wolf and the hour after sunset as the bewitching hour. On mornings when I was sleeping during that pre-dawn period, the hour of the wolf, I would have the most distressing and horrible nightmares. When someone is already in a state of distress, panic, and fear can be greatly intensified in these hours. Once I finally had the epiphany that I should try oxytocin on myself, I waited until I was under the influence of one of these unpleasant miasms and then began my experiment. One night, I set my alarm to wake up before this period and dosed myself with oxytocin as the hour of the wolf kicked in, and the outcome felt nearly miraculous. The severity of obsessive negative thoughts during this acute grieving period were altered within minutes after using oxytocin, whereas before I had to breathe through this emotionally difficult hour as if I were in a Lamaze class. That survival strategy became unnecessary with the use of oxytocin. This time, I was actually able to play music until the sun came up. It took about 10 minutes to experience the full effect, and with each passing minute, a great sense of emotional equanimity took place. I could feel it doing something in less than a minute. The panic and fear dropped away from me as if I were shedding clothing. If I wanted to think about my son's train accident, I could. But the moment I didn't want to think about it, the accident faded into the background of my mind. It wasn't there hammering away at me as if it had a life of its own. By successfully diverting these negative feelings from wherever they would have taken me, I was able to process my grief without the interference of negative obsessions. This was invaluable, to say the very least, and kept me from developing severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, because that was certainly where I was headed. 45 days after my son passed in 2007, I was giving a lecture at the Mind Institute at the University of California at Davis about how hyperbaric oxygen therapy can influence damaged neurons in the brains of autistic children. In private, I met with Dr. Robert Hendren, then the head of the Mind Institute, before leaving to chair the child psychiatry department at UCSF. After talking with him about my work with autistic children and oxytocin, I then told Dr. Hendren of the relief I had found from my grief and the website I had established for others needing help out of the quicksand of despair, www.griefsos.com. Interestingly, in 2009, the Mind Institute invited Dr. Eric Hollander, Chair Child Psychiatry, Mount Sinai School of Medicine, to lecture on the use of oxytocin in those diagnosed with autism. The lecture is viewable in its entirety on YouTube. To date, I have never prescribed oxytocin for a patient in grief who did not report significant benefit from its use. However, do understand that there are rare individuals that do not respond to oxytocin, no matter how much they may need it or how much you give them. It is as if they have no oxytocin receptors. Fortunately, very rare. As for myself, after just a few weeks, I was able to completely stop using oxytocin. Oxytocin helps the brain process. It doesn't stop you from grieving, but it sure helps you process it from a more emotionally grounded place. In that short period of time, it gave me the ability to deal with the worst kind of emotional pain without getting completely swallowed up by it. It is past time for this potent hormone to become widely known and understood both within the medical field and in the general population, for its absence can turn one's life inside out and upside down. How is oxytocin made? Oxytocin is a hormone manufactured in the hypothalamus, the part of the brain that, along with the hormone vasopressin, which allows the body to regulate its water content by reducing urine output. From the hypothalamus, oxytocin travels to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland and is released when needed. Oxytocin and its relationship to fear, anxiety, and trust. There are oxytocin receptors in the brain of both sexes, as well as in the uterus of a pregnant woman. One of the key effects of oxytocin is to block fear, anxiety, and panic input into the amygdala. The amygdala is the almond-shaped group of nuclei located deep within the medial temporal lobes of the brain and is part of the limbic system, which modulates emotion, behavior, long-term memory, and olfaction. The amygdala is also the part of the brain that modulates trust. In effect, by blocking fear, panic, and anxiety, there can be trust. I don't think oxytocin engenders trust as much as it blocks fear, because one does not trust when one is in fear. So it would probably be more accurate to say that oxytocin is the hormone of blocking fear, rather than to call it the trust or love hormone. In any case, researchers have confirmed a strong link between oxytocin and sociability. In other words, when we're emotionally and physically healthy and in balance, we are naturally social. Fear is the opposite of love. Fear is not how things work, and if one is operating out of fear, things will not work out. Oxytocin and childbirth. Oxytocin is one of the primary hormones associated with childbirth. During labor, the receptor cells that allow a woman's body to respond to oxytocin are greatly increased, and it is oxytocin that stimulates powerful contractions, which helps to dilate the cervix and move the baby down and out of the birth canal. This distension of the lower birth canal and stimulation of pelvic autonomic nerves leads to oxytocin release if there is no epidural. In fact, if a woman does have an epidural, she may need to be given additional oxytocin to minimize the need to use forceps, although low dose as opposed to high dose oxytocin and epidural anesthesia will increase cesarean section rates. When women in labor need help to trigger or strengthen their uterine contractions, the drug they are given is called Pitocin, which is in fact oxytocin, but synthetic version. This is the end of part 1.